Why don't we do that? We can do the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. Um, yeah, I'll do just do in Tibetan because I don't have the English. Sangye chodon sogi chodon wa jaju badu dani kyabshu chi dagi jinsagi petsanangi Gala benju sangye rupo sho sangye chodon sogi chodon wa jaju badu dani kyabshu chi dagi chushi di ejige sonangi Gala benju sangye rupo sho. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merit I create through explaining the Dharma, may I become enlightened in order to benefit all sentient beings. So let's take a moment and generate bodhicitta motivation, or the most positive possible motivation that we can generate, thinking that, recognizing that ourselves and all sentient beings are the same and experiencing infinite suffering in the oceans of samsaric suffering from life to life, taking rebirth again and again through the force of karma and afflictive emotions. And now the only way to eliminate suffering is by eliminating the root cause, which is ignorance, grasping at inherent existence. So in order to free ourselves from suffering, we must realize emptiness, and in order to free other sentient beings from suffering, we must realize emptiness. So therefore, we'll engage in this session about emptiness, the antidote to the ignorance, which is the root of samsara. So by this, may we quickly become enlightened and lead all other sentient beings in the state of full enlightenment. Okay. So last week so this is a module. I think it's like the 6th module. I think Discovering Buddhism. We're doing it now, and we're doing it as a module on the wisdom of emptiness, wisdom realizing emptiness. So here, wisdom is a mind, emptiness is the object realized. So when we talk about emptiness, it's the object something we realize, and we realize it with a mind that discriminates, that critically analyzes at first, and then later we generate a single point of concentration, realizing emptiness, or direct perception. But at first, we need to get a good conceptual understanding of what emptiness is. And the best way to do that is to think about how things are interdependently arising. So last week, we discussed mainly, why it's important to realize emptiness. The reason being that it's the root cause of suffering. And then I shared some sutra quotations about that from the King Concentration Sutra, the Rice Sitting Sutra, and then some quotations from Nagarjuna, so forth. So yeah, the main thing we wanted to take away from last week is that the emptiness is the root cause of suffering. And then there's the important quotation I discussed kind of at length about how this process, it's like a 4-part process or a 5-part process of how first we have the ignorance grasping at things as existing in a more concrete way than they actually do. So we grasp at things as existing from their own side, having a kind of inherent essence. And then we perceive things as either attractive or unattractive, and we perceive that attractiveness or unattractiveness as existing as inherent properties of an object. So it has a stronger influence on our mind. It's not just something, that we perceive. It's something real from the object side. And then based on that kind of perception of objects as really being either pleasing or unpleasing to us, then we generate attachment for those that are attractive to us and aversion to those that are unattractive to us. So then we generate this kind of afflicted state of mind, attachment or aversion, where our mind's powerfully moved by either wanting one or not wanting the other. And then based on that, we engage in actions where we try to possess the things we're attached to and repel things we're unattached to. So thereby we create karmic actions. And then when that karma ripens, then it results in suffering experiences. So the negative karma ripens as this, suffering of suffering, and the positive or virtuous karma then ripens as pleasant experiences, which is, in the nature of suffering. It's a suffering of change, ultimately unsatisfying experiences. Yeah, so that was all kind of last week, and then we didn't quite finish my outlines for last week. So we're left with how to begin thinking about emptiness. So why don't we pick up there? I'll switch over to the PowerPoint slide now. Okay. So yeah, so then how to begin? So once we kind of are convinced we need to realize emptiness, then how do we sort of start? There's a few preliminary things we won't go through in any detail, but one is gaining faith. So here, gaining faith in the teacher, in the teaching of emptiness. And then, so I think, okay. So first, gaining faith in the teacher and teaching of emptiness. I thought I had more detail. An outline of it. Oh, yeah, I know. Okay.
Your sound is dropped.
So the sound is there or no? It's okay. Okay. Yeah. So just briefly, this yeah, I mean, when the traditional presentation of emptiness in the text, they'll talk about the validity of the source of the teaching on emptiness. So the idea is that to establish Shakyamuni Buddha as a valid valid person, because he taught unmistakably the Four Noble Truths from within his own experience of realizing them. And then how Shakyamuni Buddha. So the idea first is that Shakyamuni Buddha is a valid teacher for various reasons. So one way we can, establish that for ourselves is looking at his, his life story, the way he basically conducted his life, especially from time of going forth as into ordination, and then achieving enlightenment, and then teaching others. How he, exclusively used his life to benefit others, to serve others, and wasn't, completely honest and altruistic his entire life. So there's many stories, to that effect from different sutras. Not to mention just looking at how his teaching is, internal, how it's internally consistent. It's not contradictory. And then looking at one's own experience of how the Buddha's teaching seem to be effective in benefiting oneself. That's a big source of gaining faith and confidence. So then when we turn to a more difficult teaching like emptiness, then even though it's not something that's maybe we understand immediately right away, then it helps to have some kind of perseverance to keep trying to understand, because we have confidence in the person who's explaining it. Although this is a little awkward, because a lot of times, like His Holiness says, for new people new to Buddhism, it's good to learn about especially dependent arising and emptiness first, because there are things that understanding them just depends upon reason and logic. It doesn't depend upon having faith in anyone in particular. But but they're not easy to understand. So, teaching like on impermanence and death, like we did in the last module with me, is much easier. Right? So, and then in many sutras, the Buddha, well, several sutras, the Buddha gave prophecies about who would unmistakably explain his teaching on emptiness in the future. And so there are sutra passages where Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti are prophesied, and even Lama Tsongkhapa are prophesied to in the future times after Shakyamuni Buddha passes away, to be valid teachers. But we don't have time to go through those verses now, so I'll just skip over. But you can find a different text if you look. Especially in the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, that most extensive kind of presentation of emptiness. It's there. In the required readings, I'm not sure any of those. Some of them are probably there. Not many. Okay, so gaining faith in the teacher and in the teaching of emptiness. Then, so there's also, that's why I shared sutra quotes last time, explaining why that it is important to realize emptiness and why. And then purifying obscurations and accumulating merit. So yeah, this is something that, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche or some would spend a whole session just talking about that in relation to emptiness. Probably in Rinpoche's book, like Virtue and Reality, and maybe some of the teachings, the PDF Rinpoche does discuss that. But it's a typical topic in all the presentations of emptiness. Even Pabonko Rinpoche mentions it. So because we have, our minds are obscured since beginningless time by ignorance, attachment, anger, and so forth. So to realize anything profound, and especially that which directly is an antidote to this ignorance we've had since beginningless time, is difficult. So we need to purify. On the one hand, we need to purify our obscurations, especially obscurations coming from having created non-virtuous karma, like by killing, stealing, lying, abandoning the Dharma, um, and harming our sentient beings in different ways. So it helps realize emptiness to purify our minds by practicing confession. And then doing different purification practices like reciting the Vajrasattva mantra, making prostrations, and reciting the names of 35 Buddhas, and so forth. But especially confession practices, where we think of the non-virtuous things we've done and confess, vow not to do again in the future, and then especially visualize purifying that negative karma. And then it's important to accumulate merit, because it takes a lot of merit to generate any positive qualities on the spiritual path in general, but especially wisdom, realizing emptiness, because it's such a powerful antidote. It acts so powerfully to counteract the force of all the afflictive emotions that it's difficult to realize. So we need a great storehouse of positive energy. So we need to accumulate merit by doing things like practicing pure morality, keeping vows, practicing generosity, and then making offerings, like offering water bowls and making other offerings to our teachers, just trying to help other people, and then generate loving kindness and compassion, positive attitudes. So on all those different ways we accumulate merit. Especially making offerings to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, making offerings to our own teachers, and to holy objects like Dharma centers, so forth, stupas. So this purifying obscurations, accumulating merit, and then gaining an understanding of how to use. Maybe I should add, that's the reason Lama Zopa Rinpoche emphasizes that at Dharma centers. So you see, especially at FMT centers, usually there's a lot of holy objects hankas and statues and stupas. And so one reason for that is because it makes it very easy for us to, well, every time we see or, see holy objects, it purifies the mind and it gives, and then the more holy objects there are, it's more opportunities to accumulate merit by, just making prostration, by folding your hands, or by, offering flowers or fruit or whatever, by making offerings in front of to the holy objects, which are representations of the Buddha Dharma Sangha. It's a very easy way to accumulate merit, or sponsoring, the creation of holy objects is an easy way to accumulate merit. Yeah, so that's one reason Rinpoche emphasizes that. And then the third, gaining an understanding of how to use logical reasoning. So this is the one we will go into the least, but we need to use logic to understand emptiness. Here in this small module, we won't have time to go into kind of the Buddhist logic, but generally we all have a modern education, and the logic, the way logic is used is the same. So I think in general, because we all have it, just a modern education, it's we have the good enough resources to know how to think logically. And then but it is good, I mean, if you get an opportunity and you're interested in the future to study more formally, like logic and reasoning, and how a valid proof is kind of constructed. That's what we do in the monastery. We spend a whole year and then 2 months of every year for like 15 years on logic. But and that's one, I guess I wanted to mention here also, that's one of the most important things, I guess, Tsongkhapa did, Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug tradition, that he did in his life was combine, a deep understanding of Buddhist logic as it's presented by Dharmakirti and Dignaga, and reasoning with the Buddhist teachings on emptiness in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, clarify what the Buddha's actual intent was regarding the ultimate nature of phenomena, and how to establish that by using valid reasoning. So yeah, before Tsongkhapa, there were people, as Pamuk Rinpoche points out in his commentary, there were Buddhist masters in the Nyingma school, and among the Kampa Geshes and so forth, who had a correct understanding of emptiness. But because the way they wrote about or explained emptiness was not totally crystal clear to their disciples, then later on, misunderstandings arose. So at Tsongkhapa's time, there were many wrong views about how to meditate on emptiness. So in order to clear those up, then he made great effort to write, compose, and then give very clear explanations of how to realize emptiness, combined with logic and reasoning. So how to think about emptiness logically and clearly, and then how to use logic to dispel misunderstandings related to emptiness. And then for thinking about how things exist and how we perceive them. So that's what I encourage you to do for homework last time, just to start to think about just generally how things exist, right? It's just a general question, like, how do things exist? How do I exist? Especially when we start with ourselves, it's easiest. And then, yeah, so then some general ideas like permanent versus impermanent. So thinking more about how things exist and how we perceive them. Because the whole, I mean, well, ignorance, grasping at inherent existence. So the whole problem is the way things appear to us, to our sense consciousness, to our mental consciousness. There's different kinds of appearances, but one aspect of that appearance is completely mistaken, right? And so there's a difference between the way things appear and the way they actually exist. So that's what we need to unfold, that's what we need to resolve, is this difference, this disharmony, disconnection in the way things appear, how they appear in a false way, and then how they actually exist. So to cut through that false appearance is what we need to use logic and reasoning. But to begin to do that, we just need to start to be more aware of, be more attentive to how things appear to us. And it helps to do that, to ask some basic questions. So, and think about how things exist in different ways. So there's permanent versus impermanent phenomena, and then how things are produced from causes versus not being produced from causes. How some things having, what does it mean for things to have parts versus not have parts? And then what does it mean for things to exist in relation to other things versus existing in complete isolation from things? And then asking other important questions, which I mentioned at the end last time. So maybe just the first set here I'll speak about now, and the last ones we'll come back to at the end, later on. So the first, permanent versus impermanent, is very important to understand. Everything that exists can be divided into things that are permanent and things that are not permanent, things that are impermanent. So here, permanent means not lasting forever, but rather it means things that don't change, things that exist, but they don't change momentarily. And so not changing from moment to moment. So a good example of this is like, the equation 2 + 2 = 4. It's a truth that, you take 2 and you add another 2, so 2 + 2. And when you put, two sets of 2 together, you have a set of 4. So that's just it's a truth, and it's something that exists. That 2 + 2 equals, the fact that 2 + 2 = 4. That's something that exists, but that truth is not changing moment to moment. In every time, in every place, it's always true. So it's not that, like, 2 + 2 = 4 in in one moment, and then a few minutes later it's changed and becomes something else, right? That truth is exactly the same, in 5 minutes ago and now, and will be exactly the same, 5 minutes or 5 years or 5 eons from now. That'll be exactly the same. There'll be nothing that's changed about it. And also, it doesn't change momentarily. It doesn't disintegrate through time. It doesn't become older, right, and disintegrate or change into something else. And therefore that truth, it doesn't, or that thing, 2 + 2 = 4, it doesn't produce results. Like in the way, like you turn on the stove or you turn on your laptop computer and then it produces, an image on the screen, or you yourself, you say something, and then based on that, someone else hears that and then generates an idea in their mind, or an understanding in their mind. So that 2 + 2, there is a mind realizing that object, but that equation hasn't produced that mind, right? Because it can't interact with things in the way that it changes something else, because it itself doesn't change. So that all is a little bit more complicated, but the main thing to understand is that there are things which exist which are not changing momentarily. Whereas, so those are all called permanent phenomena. It doesn't mean, again, that they've existed forever. Like in the case of the equation 2 + 2, maybe you might say it has existed forever. So, but there are other things that are more obviously adventitious. They arise at a certain point, they pass away at another certain point. But during the duration of their existence, they're not changing forever. Yeah, I'll come back to another example of that later. But for now, just to contrast with things that are impermanent. So everything that we can perceive, I mean, the best example of things that are impermanent and changing moment by moment are things we can perceive with our senses. So everything that we can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, all of those are impermanent. So, like the things you see in front of you, your table, your laptop, your hands, if you put them there. Those are all impermanent. Our bodies, everything physical is impermanent. And then also our minds, our consciousness. So all the thoughts, feelings, perceptions, They're continually, we can see how they're changing continually moment by moment. So they're all impermanent. So for something to be impermanent means it's changing momentarily. From moment to moment, it's changing. Okay, so because this is important because the reasoning to establish emptiness, then it helps a lot to know the difference between permanent and impermanent phenomena. Yeah, emptiness itself is a permanent phenomena, but I'll come back to why later on. But we as a person, our body and mind are impermanent, changing. So then the other ones I'll come back to later. So, and these questions will come back to. Yeah, and these ones too. So that's it for what we had left from last session. So yeah, just a note about session today. Again, we won't do discussion group again today because I think it's more important to clear up some questions regarding what I'm talking about. Then from next week, we'll do discussion group for the last 4 sessions. So yeah, so again today, I think I have probably more in the outlines than I can actually cover in this session, but it's okay. We just go slowly, try to keep things clear, and then work through things as we have time. So the next, okay, so once we're convinced we need to realize emptiness and we start thinking about how things exist or not, then the next big thing is to kind of, well, in the reasoning to establish emptiness, there's different kinds of reasonings, but the easiest one to start with is, it's called the four-point analysis. Should have typed it out somewhere actually, but it's called the 4-point analysis. So this is one Pablo Rinpoche focuses on in his presentation in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. So in the 4-point analysis, there's 4 main points to go through. The first one is it's called identifying the object of negation. So here I've paraphrased it a little bit as just saying identifying what is to be negated. So, and this is the most difficult step in the 4 points. What's the most difficult to do? So what does that mean here is because obviously when we say emptiness, as one person's question alluded to in the last session, a lot of times when we think emptiness, we think like, oh, empty room or empty space, or like where there's nothing, there's nothing there, so it's empty. And it's true, like, if you look at a mug and say it's empty, it means, well, because there's nothing inside. There's no water, there's no milk, there's no tea, there's no coffee, there's nothing. It's empty, or an empty box. And so a lot of times we jump to the conclusion that emptiness means nothing, that nothingness, that nothing exists, which is totally wrong. That's nihilism, right? That's one of the extremes. So here, emptiness, we're talking about emptiness of the middle way, you might say. It's a specific emptiness of a specific thing, right? Not emptiness of everything. Emptiness of a specific kind of thing, which avoids the 2 extremes. That's why it's called the middle way. It avoids the 2 extremes of nihilism, on the one hand, thinking that nothing exists, and the extreme of, well, you can say permanence. It's usually said permanence, but it means the extreme of overly reifying, grasping at things as being more concrete than they really are. So we want to find the middle way between those. So like Lama Tsongkhapa presents, when he presents emptiness and the Great Treatise on Independent, this Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path of Dependent Arising, Lamrim Chenmo. You can see why we use the Tibetan for that, because it's way shorter. That he talks a lot about this the possible mistake of either negating too much, means refuting too much and ending up in nihilism, or not negating enough and still grasping at inherent existence. So we need to try to find this middle way. So, but the main point here is to identify what is to be negated versus dependent arising. So when we talk about emptiness, we're talking about empty of what, right? what is it that's not there? So once we identify clearly, like, what is it that we're trying to refute, then we can more easily understand that, it's the lack of that is what we're trying to, see and be aware of when we meditate on emptiness. And the main way to identify that is by compare with, yeah, versus. So as opposed to means dependent arising, is to compare with dependent arising. So there's 5 headings here. I'm not sure how much we'll get through today, but we'll see. To understand, so first, to understand emptiness, we need to understand what things are empty of. And then type of ignorance we need to eliminate. So there's an ignorance grasping at inherent existence. So which is the main object of negation, the thing to be negated, the thing to be proven to not exist. Is there's many synonyms for it, right? So but one is inherent existence. So there's ignorance grasping at is existing in a way that they do not. So there's different types of that. And then, yeah, so then there is specific ignorance grasping at inherent existence. And then cursor, trying to identify this reification by ignorance in our own experience. So it's important we try to get some experiential understanding. So we started to do last week in our meditation. And then comparing our ordinary perceptions with an understanding of dependent arising. So something like that we'll go through. So the first, to understand emptiness, we need to understand what things are empty of. What is that? That's the wrong one. Okay. So here, let's look at this verse. Just kind of emphasizing again the importance of dependent arising. That's Sankappa. So this is just kind of to review from last week. Without the wisdom realizing ultimate reality or emptiness. So this is even though you have generated renunciation, so the wish to be free from the suffering of samsara, and the mind of enlightenment, right? The wish to become enlightened to benefit all sentient beings. You cannot cut the root cause of circling, right? So even with just renunciation of bodhicitta, you cannot cut the root cause of dying and taking rebirth in samsara again and again. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent arising. So he's and it's kind of awkward, but it's important that he says, therefore attempt the method to realize emptiness. He could have said that, emptiness. But because dependent arising is the main reasoning upon which we realize emptiness, it's the entranceway, the gateway to realizing emptiness. Therefore, he said, strive to understand dependent arising. Okay. So, and that's from the three principal aspects of the path. One of the Lamrim prayers that it's good to recite, meditate on every day. Okay, so here, to understand emptiness, we need to understand what things are empty of. So again, 3 headings here. The objects existing from their own side. I think, yeah, that has 7. So, so what things are empty of is, what objects are empty of. Objects are they're empty of existing from their own side. So a synonym for that is or having inherent existence. And then we want to compare that with being interdependently related. So, and then another heading is emptiness of inherent existence. What is that? And then emptiness is a lack of something false that we superimpose onto objects of reality. So the first, so objects existing from their own side or having inherent existence versus being interdependently related. Okay, so first let's just think a little bit about dependent arising in general. So first we'll look at dependent arising in general, and then contrast how we have this perception of that not being the case. So let's start with ourselves as a person. How do we exist? So instead of like making that a totally abstract phenomenon, we just want to look at ordinary things. Like we have a body, that's made up of parts. We have, 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, head, all of our organs. and then all the different parts of our body, our skin, our bones, our blood, and then down to the level of cells, different kinds of cells. And then within the cells are so complex. The cell nucleus, the mitochondria, the cell wall, DNA. So, physical. So if we just start with our body, we can see we're made up of many, many, many different parts. Right? And are those parts all static and just staying still? Like I was just in the Uffizi Museum the other day. Look at all these, beautiful humans that are made of marble. Right. So they're just stone, they look like very lifelike and real, but they're stone. So those, they're not changing very much. But we look at us, we're breathing, our blood is flowing, we're eating and digesting and thinking. So our bodies are very, they're not static, they're very dynamic, changing continually. And then look at our minds, right? Are we only a body, only something physical? No, we're not inanimate objects, we're an animate object. We have a mind, a consciousness, we're aware of things, we think about things, we think about the past, think about the future, make plans, and perceive things, have dreams, have imagination. So we also we have a mind, right? We don't only have a body, we also have a mind. And then is our mind something solitary, just one thing? No, there's many different parts of it, right? There's many, many different aspects of consciousness, of our awareness. And is it something static or dynamic? It's dynamic, it's changing all the time, right? It's never remaining still for even a moment. That's why it's so difficult to meditate and focus our attention on one object, because our mind is always wants to think about something different, right? We like change. And then, but is my body me? Is my body I, the person? No, because I have a body, right? I'm the person who possesses my body. It's my hands, my head, my legs, my body. So clearly the body is something I possess, right? I'm not my body. Well, what about my mind? Is my mind me? Again, if we use the same logic, well, no, we talk about my mind, my thoughts, my memories, my perceptions, my imagination. So there's a difference. There's a possessor, me, which has the mind and all the different aspects of our mind. So then what are we, the person? Well, so the short answer here is, and we'll come back to analyze this, is one of the main things we want to analyze in this module, is this question: what am I as a person? But in short, like, so maybe ask a simpler question: do we depend upon our body? Does our existence depend upon our body? Yes. I mean, if our body is destroyed, then we cease to exist, right? As a human being, as the person we are now, we cease to exist. Of course, does that mean there's no rebirth? No, but it's a stream of consciousness that goes from life to life, not our body. And the person we are in this life, this human being, we don't go as a human being to our future life. So, but the person we are does go. Anyway, that's a more complicated question. But for now, does my existence depend upon my body? Yes. Does my body me? No. I'm something. So they're interrelated. We have me, the person, and then our body. And the same with our mind. Does my existence depend upon my mind existing and all the different facets of my mind? Yes, we're not separate. We're not unrelated. We're totally related. So, I mean, and just to emphasize that relationship, between us as a person and our body and our mind. I mean, well, like, are our body and mind related? Yes, because when we think, I'm going to raise my hand, then we raise our hand. If we don't have the thought to do that, then that doesn't happen, right? Our body just doesn't. There are involuntary actions like our heart beating. We don't have to think like, okay, heart beat again, and then beat again, and then again and again. That happens without us thinking about it. But voluntary actions like raising our hand or talking, it has to be preceded by a thought to do that. If we don't have the thought and the intention to do it, it doesn't happen. So clearly our body and mind, and then our body and mind are related. Another way we see that is when we're very happy, we feel different in our body. When we're very sad, we feel heavy. When we're happy, we feel like energized. And we can see when we become afraid, it causes adrenaline to rush in our body. When we're kind of calm, we have a relaxed feeling in our body. So Our body and mind are related, and then as a person, we're related to both of those. So again, when we intend to do something, we can move our body, or we can think, we can direct our attention and shift our mind, our attention to things. So this is just all instances of dependent arising. But what this means is like there's like communication or contact in a way, a relationship between our body and us as a person, our body and our mind and our body. All those things are interacting with each other. And especially here, like as a person, we don't exist somehow in isolation from, totally unrelated to our body, unrelated to our mind. Like we don't exist, in a way that's somehow totally disconnected from, unrelated to our body and mind. In fact, I mean, can we even imagine that? Like, can you imagine existing somehow completely independently, separately from your body? Okay, body maybe, but from your mind as well, from both your body and your mind. Like if we were to take our body and our mind away and set them, lock them in the closet, and then just imagine us, relaxing in the living room, totally separate from our body and mind. Does that even make any sense? I mean, is it possible to imagine that? Like what would there be of us if we separate out our body and separate out our mind? Is there anything left to be able to point to and say that's me, or feel like that is me, person? If you feel like no, then you're on the right track. It should feel like no, there's nothing else. If you feel like yes, there is this kind of essential thing that is the real me, that is the object of negation. That one. Okay. So, but here we just want to get, and then this same kind of analysis we can do with regard to, other things like our laptop computer, a table, our car. Like, so what we've been looking at is parts, essentially, how, as a person, we're made up of different parts, and the whole of what we are, the person, it depends upon those parts. So we can do the same, same with regard to like our laptop computer or our phone, whatever, that the whole thing is dependent upon parts. Like the laptop computer, it has, a case, a screen, a lid, a motherboard, the keys. All those are different parts. None of those are the laptop computer, but yet the computer, for it to exist, it depends upon the existing all those parts, the keys, and again, the touchpad, the battery, the fan, the screen, and all those parts interact with one another, right? They have to be connected. If somehow the screen is suddenly not connected to the rest, then the computer doesn't work anymore. Same with the keys. The keys have to, when you tap on them, they have to send some signal to the motherboard. And here I'm already getting beyond my knowledge of like how computers work, but they have to send some kind of signal, and then something has to happen in the motherboard. So the whole thing, they have to be connected in a dynamic way so that they interact with each other, right? If they don't exist, the computer won't function if the parts are separated from and not interacting with each other. What's going on with my computer? Okay, so but and it's the same with the table, just something as simple as a cup. Any physical thing is made up of parts, and the parts are interacting with each other. Our consciousness, also our mind, is made up of parts, not in space, not spatially, but in time. There's our state of awareness in one moment, the next moment, the next moment, the next moment. So like, say looking, just an eye sense consciousness, looking at it and an object, it has a duration through time. And each of those moments in time is part of that whole, experience of seeing an object, right? That eye consciousness is seeing an object. Also, the same with our thoughts, they're made up of moments in time. So they have duration through time. And in that way, they're made up of parts. And one moment gives rise to the next moment. Think about in infinitesimally small moments in time. Just looking at an object, it's not a static thing. Like there's a first moment when we first look at it, and then the next moment we see it, the next moment we see the object. And the one moment of consciousness gives rise to successive moment of consciousness. And then that gives rise to a thought. And then that thought, it changes and leads to another thought and a slightly different thought and so forth. So we can see how, our sense consciousness, they're made up of parts, and then they lead to thoughts. Our thoughts lead to other thoughts, which lead us to look at other things and experiencing other things. And so there's this another kind of dependent arise dynamic process. So now we want to contrast that with what is the object of negation. So these are different kinds of dependent arising in general. And then, so we want to contrast that now with the sense that things exist concretely from their own side or having their own essence. So I've started making a table of synonyms for inherent existence versus dependent arising. I'll share with you later. But there are a lot of synonyms, phrases that mean the same thing. So here, the sense of things having or existing concretely from their own side and having their own essence. So let's contrast that now. So think about, okay, dependent arising. So inherent existence is the very opposite of dependent arising. So instead of things existing in a way where they interact with each other, if things had inherent, so to inherently exist means they exist in and of their own right. If something inherently existed, it exists in and of its own right or from its own side without depending upon anything else and other things. So let's go back to the example of ourselves as a person, right? So the question is, when we think of ourselves or when we have a sense of ourselves as a person, how do we appear to our own mind? Does it appear as if we are something that is dependent upon other things that are not us, that is dependent upon our body and dependent upon our mind and dependent upon change through time, different and dependent upon these interrelated kind of interrelation between many different things? Or, right, does it appear to ourselves as if there is some kind of essential I that is independent, like not dependent upon anything else, that has its kind of own reality? It exists from its own side. It's like there's a sense that is there a sense, right? Let's keep it as a question, that at the core of us as a person, there is something kind of real, unchanging, and kind of concrete. This is, it's like an essence basically, or an intrinsic existence. There's an intrinsically existent I. It's like it just is there. It doesn't depend upon anything else. So usually, like the easiest, we can think about this in different ways. Like now, as I'm describing it, you're probably thinking about it just, in a kind of neutral state, just thinking, okay, how do I perceive myself? And maybe in this kind of sense of an inherently existent I, or a self, an I, a person existing from its own side, it doesn't appear so strong. It appears with different strength at different times and different states of mind. So when it appears, so we want to look at the ones that appears more strongly first. So a good example when we have a strong sense, this kind of sense, is when we're accused of doing something wrong. Especially if we're falsely accused, even if we're rightly accused, but if we're falsely accused, especially when we're very defensive. Yeah, why don't we take a moment and just try this, right? So imagine a moment and some experience in the past, or you can just make up. You can either remember some experience when it actually happened, or just kind of imagine it happening. When you did something, when someone falsely accused you of doing something wrong, which you hadn't done. So just try that for a moment. Try to remember a time or imagine. It's more effective to remember an actual experience. And then the main thing here is that you feel defensive in that moment. They accuse you of doing something wrong, which you didn't. And then you react by feeling defensive, thinking kind of like, how could you say that to me? I didn't do that. What are you saying about me? Um, I didn't do that. So then at that time, look at how the I, oneself, appears in that moment. So in that moment, does the I exist as something that just is there by its own power, from its own side? Or does the I appear as something that is dependent upon many parts, the body and mind, and kind of dynamic change? So which way does it appear? Does it appear as if it's dependently arising phenomena? Or does it appear as something that just is there by its own power? Okay, I can stop looking. So, yeah, so what did you think? Could you see a kind of, what did you get kind of a sense of the way the eye appears in that sort of situation? Did it seem like there is some kind of appearance of an eye that is just there by its own power? That's kind of solid. Sometimes you even have a physical feeling like in the chest, like we do when we get very defensive. It's almost like there's a tight, kind of solid feeling in the chest that like feels like it's, right here, the eye. Although it doesn't necessarily have to be in the chest, but instinctively, that's usually kind of how we feel. Yeah, so I don't know, do you have any questions? Maybe I'll take a couple of questions now if you have any questions right now. And then we can have a break. Yeah, Mary?
Is there a difference between realizing emptiness like logically and the direct perception of emptiness?
Yes, the direct perception of emptiness is non-conceptual. But to do that, first we have to realize emptiness conceptually and then meditate on it again and again and again, and then gradually we generate a non-conceptual realization.
Like the 4-point reasoning of what we were just talking about, and then the pervasion, establishing the pervasion and saying I don't exist independently and I don't exist in relation. I forgot what the 4 points are, but
I didn't go through them yet. We'll do that next week. We're just looking at the first point, trying to identify what is it that we're negating when we, that's the first point. It's just identifying the object of negation, which means identifying the sense of how, first we and then other things, how they seem to exist just in and of their own right, from their own side, without depending upon other things.
If you do all 4 points and you're successful, that's just a conceptual understanding of emptiness, right? That's not the actual direct perception of emptiness.
Yes. Yeah.
Meditate again and again on those 4 points, and then you eventually have a direct perception.
Yes. But there we might be talking lifetimes. No. It takes a long time now to generate a direct perception of emptiness. That's very, 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 very high kind of state of realization. Yeah. Yeah, I want to know more about, because I wanted to make sure this, you're kind of clear on this. Did you, I mean, I hope you're able to see, like, yeah, in this little meditation we just did, the difference, so just try to contrast in your mind. Like, I hope you're able to see this contrast between when I was talking about how we depend upon our body and mind, as a person, how we depend upon our body and mind, and we're thinking about that. It's quite easy, right? That makes sense. And we do feel like, yes, as a person, I do depend upon my body, I depend upon my mind. So when we talk about that and think about that, yeah, it's not something, we think, oh, no, that's not the case. No, it does feel like, yeah, our body has lots of parts and we depend upon all those parts. Our mind has lots of parts. We're all interconnected with those. We're interrelated with those. So then when we think about, we're sort of rationally thinking about what we are as a person, it feels very different. It feels like, yes, we're this kind of interrelated phenomena. But then when we stop doing that, when we're not doing that, and we just look at, think of I, how do I exist? Just even then, it feels like there's kind of a real I at the core, at the center, some essential thing. And then to make that even more strong, we think about, a time when we're falsely accused by someone, and we can use other things, the things when we're afraid, when we suddenly have fear, we grasp at I. When other people are praising us and we feel very proud of ourselves, we grasp at I more strongly. When any of the afflictive emotions, anger, attachment, greed, jealousy, depression, when any of the afflictive emotions are stronger, the grasping at I is stronger at that time. So this is something we need to check in our own experience to see, is it true? But when we're identifying this kind of false sense of the way the I appears, this false appearance, then it's good to imagine, being in those situations where afflictive emotions arise. So in this one, we're like defensiveness is one of the best, right? So where we're falsely accused of doing something, or we're jealous, of someone else. But in that moment, while we let that kind of afflictive emotion arise from the corner of our mind, we want to look back and see, how does the I seem to appear? So yeah, so again, does it seem like there is, like what I'm talking about, this kind of like a solid concrete I? Or did it seem like, when you think about this time of being falsely accused of something? Yeah, is there? Okay, yeah. Marielle?
It's hard to hold it there though. You get that instance and then you think, oh, maybe and by the time you're even there, it's gone. It just doesn't stick.
Yeah, that's why, like, Paul Rinpoche talks about how it's really important to learn to use just a corner of your attention to watch it. And he gives a very helpful analogy of, like, if you're walking along, a path, or walking along a sidewalk with a friend, that you can watch the road the path in front of you to where you're walking, but you can also be aware out of the corner of your eye where your friend is, right? So you stay the right distance from them. You're not bumping into them, but you're also not tripping over, things that are in the path, and you're going the right way. So it's that kind of awareness. You need to have this sort of let the sort of innate sense of I be arising, and also with a corner of the mind, just gently be able to be aware of it, watch it. It's true. If you start watching it too much, then it goes away. But then another technique you can try in that situation is go back to, we'll ask the question, well, who is it that's looking for the eye? You know, who's the watcher? And then, yeah, I mean, like when we're in a neutral state of mind, then, or just when we think like, who's meditating? That's another way to try to get a sense of the eye. When we can just begin to meditate, like watch our breath or something, and then ask like, you know, who am I? Where am I? Ask questions about ourselves. You know, what am I doing? I'm meditating. Who's meditating? And then look for the I. But there, the appearance of is much more gentle kind of way, much more weaker. But if we already have some experience, you know, by looking at more, you know, of the way the I appears strongly in more when we have afflictive emotions arising, and we have a decent perception of that, then we can find, you know, a milder degree of the same kind of grasping at I, and when we have more neutral state of mind. Okay. Any other questions relating to that? Okay, it seems like you all got a sense of it. Let's take a 5-minute break now, and then resume. Okay. So that little meditation we did is kind of the essential point of this session. So when I was just looking at the rest of the outlines we have to go through, they all kind of relate to that, and we've gone over many of the points. So I'll just go through some of the more outlines I wanted to go through today, and then we'll have some discussion, and then we'll do a little bit more meditation like that, the one we just did. So let's go back to the outlines here. Okay, so dependent arising in general, like we talked about in relation to ourselves as a person and then a computer and other things, versus the sense of things existing concretely or from their own side, having their own essence. So again, that means like that they seem, a thing seems to exist. So think about how us as a person, things seem to exist without depending upon anything else that is not that thing. So like with regard to us as a person, it's a sense that we seem to exist in somehow as having some kind of essence that doesn't depend upon my body or any part of my body, doesn't depend upon anybody else. It doesn't depend upon my own mind. Especially it doesn't depend upon my own conception of there being an I, there being a self. It's just irregardless of anything else, unconnected with anything else, that there's an essential I that sort of exists by its own power without depending upon anything else. So it's that kind of sense. And we can have that with relation to ourselves or with relation to other people and other things. So just to contrast these again here, Nagarjuna says in this text, The Refutation of Objections, we propound that dependent arising of things is called emptiness. So that's a little misleading actually, but it's because things are dependent arising that we say they're empty of inherent existence. But that which arises dependently has no intrinsic nature. So he's clarifying that when we say emptiness, it means having no intrinsic nature, the lack of an intrinsic nature. So when we say emptiness, we don't mean nothing, but the lack of an intrinsic nature or an inherent existence or things having their own essence or the lack of things existing from their own side. So that's what, when we say empty of what, it's empty of that kind of existence which is not dependent arising, which is rather an independently, things existing unrelated to anything else. It's an emptiness of that. So, I mean, so in a way, obviously, you know, if things are empty of, you know, they lack existing in isolation, unconnected to anything else, then the very opposite of that is what is existing in a way that's interdependently related with other things, right? Things exist as a dependent arising, as interconnected and interrelated with all other things. So those, you can see how then inherent existence and interdependent existence are opposites. Okay. Then emptiness of inherent existence. So again, emptiness is not nothingness. We made that point. And rather emptiness is emptiness of, so emptiness is emptiness of the object of negation, right? So this is an important term, this object of negation. It means when we talk about emptiness, emptiness is a negative word, right? It negates something. Emptiness of, like not or no, lack or void. All those words, they indicate the negation of something. So the negation of what? There's a certain object negated, right? So that's called the object. That's the object of negation. So the object is the object that is negated by the term emptiness in this context. Like what is that? So it is existing from its own side. So a thing existing from its own side, or inherently existent, inherently existing, inherent existence. So those are what are negated. And then there's a lot of synonyms like that, like I've already gone through many, that are negated by emptiness. So when we say emptiness, it's not nothingness. Things exist, but they don't exist in a particular way, like from their own side, by their own power, disconnected from anything else. So that's what's being negated. So again, if you have questions about this, we'll come back in just a second to those. And then, say, emptiness is the lack of something false that we superimpose onto objects of reality. So, okay, so this object of negation, inherent existence, we superimpose that onto things, onto the way things really exist. So, as an example, and this is called a self, right? So, yeah, a concretely existing self appears. And here's from Chandika's commentary on the 400 verses. He makes this point. The thing known as the self is an entity whose nature is not to be the outcome of any other functional phenomena. Selflessness is its non-existence. So selflessness is a synonym for emptiness. But selflessness is the non-existence of that. So just to read it again, this is a really clear and important quote. The thing known as self. So here self is used as a synonym for inherent existence. The way self is used in Buddhism is one of the most confusing things. But here, it's just know that self is used, to mean an inherent, like a soul, like an inherently existent or concretely existent, like essence of something. And that's what's being negated. So he says the thing known as the self is an entity whose nature is not to be the outcome of any other functional phenomena. So in relation to the person, it's like a thing whose nature is not dependent upon the body, not dependent upon the mind, not a result of karma, or not a result of our parents or anything else, but it has its own nature, which is not dependent upon or not the outcome of any other thing. So that's what's called a self. That's what's being refuted, an inherently existent self. And so the lack of that, selflessness, is its non-existence. So the non-existence of that is selflessness or emptiness. Right? So again, emptiness means the non-existence of an inherent existent self. And then, so we accept, so then there's the question of appearance. So think about when we just did that that little meditation on imagining a time when we'd been falsely accused of doing something wrong, and then this in defense we think how could you say that about me? What are they saying about me? How dare they say that? How dare they say that about me? So there's a sense of I. And that just innately appears, right? It's just an innate, spontaneous kind of appearance of this essential, concretely existent I. So that's the appearance of the object of negation, the appearance of sort of an inherently existent self, inherently existent I, or I existing from its own side. So first it appears. The appearance is not really a big deal. I mean, it's not really a problem. The problem is when we accept that appearance as real, as reality, right? So we unquestioningly, that's a word, unquestioningly accept that appearance as being accurate, as being actually how we do exist. We accept that there is a real I here, kind of at our core, that doesn't depend upon anything else. It's not like consciously we think that, right? It's like we automatically just accept that appearance as being true. It's kind of like, if we were to see a mirage, in a distance on the desert, see this kind of shimmering, silvery, shimmering, and we just automatically accept there's water there, right? It's appearance like water, and we automatically accept, oh, there's water there without analyzing. When we analyze, we think, oh no, I'm in a desert. Like there is no water in the desert, and it's really hot, and it hasn't rained in a whole month. There's no way there's water there, right? The appearance is still there, as if like the surface of a lake. The appearance is there, but because we analyze, we know that it's not there, right? We reject that. So similarly, when we analyze to see if that kind of person exists, we can see that, it doesn't. But usually we don't do that, right? We don't analyze. It's like this very concrete, real kind of essentially concretely existing I appears, and we assent to that appearance. We accept it. We just accept that, yeah, there is a real I here that I need to defend, that I need to, defend. Is to stick with that, that is under attack, and I have to defend, right? Or that needs to get what I want, right? So yeah. So when in meditating on emptiness, we want to analyze that again and again. Whenever that self, that I want to use Chandrakirti's term again. That self whose nature is not the outcome of any other phenomena, any other functioning thing, or any other phenomena. So whenever that one arises, we want to be aware of it and then analyze to see, does it actually exist? Do I actually exist like that? So when we talk about ignorance, grasping at inherent existence, is that mind that accepts that, when the I appears with relation to us as a person, or when relation to other phenomena, when that self that seems to be not the outcome of, or not related to any other phenomena, just existing in and of its own right. When that appears, then we grasp at that as being real. That's the ignorance, the mind that's grasping at that as being real. So that's the point here. We accept that appearance of inherent existence as real, and grasp at a concretely existing essence, or a self that is not dependent upon anything else, right? And then there's two kinds of self that appear. A self of persons means in relation to a person. There's the appearance of this kind of inherent existence, or relation to inanimate phenomena other than persons. So if we think about like the computer, when we look at the computer as an example, there seems to be there's a real computer there, not dependent upon all the parts. It just is there, or not dependent upon my idea of computer. Just there's a real thing there in relation to all other phenomena. Yeah, everything we see that appears to our sense consciousness or our mental consciousness, it seems to have like the table is a table just from its own side. The mouse, is a mouse. It's a real mouse from its own side. The chair is a real chair, from its own side. So we'll come back to reasonings to refute that. But the point for the session today is just get a sense of how things do appear to be what, what they are, just independently of anything else, independent of their parts, independently of, the causes and conditions that gave rise to them, independent of our, mental concept, our mental imputation, or our ideas about them. So the self to be refuted is in relation to persons or phenomena, and then the grasping, because there's two kinds of self, there's two kinds of grasping at a self of persons, and grasping at a self phenomena. So when we grasp at this sense of I existing from my own side, that's grasping at self of persons, and then when we grasp at maybe chocolate cake being delicious from its own side, that's grasping at a self phenomenon. It being chocolate cake from its own side, grasping at itself. So we'll come back to examples of those, but just know that now there's two kinds of objects of negation, self of persons and self phenomena, and two kinds of ignorance, grasping at those, grasping at self of persons and grasping at self of phenomena. And then, so the more about the type of ignorance that we're trying to eliminate, we talk about, we're meditating on emptiness in order to eliminate ignorance. So the type of ignorance is not an ignorance which is just a not knowing, right? There's different kinds of ignorance in general. There's many different kinds of ignorance. So one kind of ignorance is just not knowing something. Like if I ask you, when was my mother born? What's her, what's the time, the date and year that she was born, and the time of day? Time of day, I don't even know. But the date and the year, then you don't know that, right? So that's you're ignorant with relation to that. Even the year, I know how old she is, but without calculating, I can't bring up the year to mind. So, or there are many things like that. Like what did, like say, what did Joe Biden have for lunch yesterday? I bet none of us know that. Maybe Mary Ellen, because she has kind of an inside track to the White House. But generally, like, think, what did Joe Biden have lunch yesterday? Yes, of course. I think so. He was too busy. At least he had one meal, maybe at least breakfast, not lunch. But what did he have, and did he enjoy it? Like, we don't know that, right? So it's not important, but it is something. It's an example of ignorance, that a kind of ignorance where we just don't know something, right? So there's many infinite kinds of that. We think about those to reduce our pride, right? But that's one kind of ignorance, but that's not the kind of ignorance we're talking about here. It's not, here we're not concerned with just not knowing something. So there's another kind of ignorance where we mistakenly apprehend something. So for example, so a simple example is like if, say we're missing, we're missing something from our room. So we're missing our wallet or our car keys. Well, let's say our wallet. Let's stick with that because it becomes more exciting. So we're missing our wallet, our purse from our room where we keep our money, and we can't find it. And there's someone maybe staying in our house who's been in our house who we suspect they might have taken it. Right. So then imagine that we jump to the conclusion, oh, I think they took it, whereas they actually didn't, right? And then later on we find, and then later on when we find it, we realize that idea, thinking that, oh, this person took my wallet, was completely wrong, right? We were mistakenly apprehending that. So it's that's another kind of ignorance where we grasp at something as being the case when it's not, right? So like in the case where we lost our wallet, and then we were trying to figure out where it is. We can't find it anywhere. And then we jump to the conclusion, oh, that person who was in the house, they took it, I'm sure. Like they took it. That's a kind of ignorance. We're superimposing like thief basically on a person when it's not there. The person didn't take it, but we're superimposing means we're kind of grasping at them as being something that they're not, or having done something which they didn't do, having taken our wallet when they didn't take it. And then later on, when we find it, oh, maybe, you know, we left it in the car or something, we find it there. Then we generate a kind of wisdom of where the wallet is and what happened to it. And that wisdom dispels the ignorance of grasping at that person as having taken it. That ignorance grasping at that person having taken my wallet now is completely gone. And it'll never come back because we found definite evidence of where the wallet is and we know what happened to it. Right? So the point here is that, yeah, there's two different kinds of ignorance. One is not just not knowing something. That's not the kind of ignorance. Another kind is mistakenly apprehending something to be the case, whereas it's not the case. So that is the kind of ignorance we're concerned with here. But here we're not concerned with, you know, like grasping at, you know, and we do this all the time. We might grasp at, you know, like certain kind of food as being healthy when it's not, or certain kind of behavior being, you know, good when it's actually not, or, you know, other people being very, you know, other people, we grasp at other people in all different ways that are mistaken. You know, gradually we realize that the case. We grasp at ourselves in mistaken ways. You know, we think I can't do something when actually we can, and gradually we realize that we can. Like maybe when we, I don't know, when we first saw a bicycle, we thought, oh, there's no way I can ride that. No. But then later we try, and then we figure out how to do it, and we can. Or like my mother, she, a few years ago, she would use, I don't even remember what it's called, for, you know, for navigating in your car. You used to have that thing that you has, you have to plug it into the lighter, and it has its own like system, like a Grumman, I think Grumman thing, and it's you navigate. So my mom was using that way after, like, you know, Google Maps, and, you know, she had a smartphone, just didn't know how to use Google Maps and the navigate, you know, function in the map. So I remember a few years ago I visited her and I was like, Mom, you know, you have to stop using this Grumman thing. It's like way more difficult to use than just use Google Maps. She's like, no, I know how to do it already. I can't figure out that, you know, Google Maps. I don't know how to use it. It's too difficult. I'm not going to use it. But then a couple of years later, I come back and she's just using Google Maps. Like every time she goes out, you know, she maps that in. So she doesn't know how to go anywhere without that. But, and not using the Grumman thing is just still sitting in her glove box. But so sometimes this is an example of a kind of, we have a kind of ignorance related to ourselves where we think we can't do something when actually, you know, we can. We just have to go through the steps of learning how to do that. So yeah, so that's a mistakenly grasping at something as being not the case, mistakenly apprehending something. So here in relation to emptiness, we mistakenly apprehend ourselves as existing in a more concrete way than we actually do. In relation to phenomena, we grasp at things as existing, you know, being what they are from their own side, independent or separately, in isolation from any other phenomena. They just really are that thing they are. Garmin. Yeah. Okay. So those, and then so the ignorance grasping at inherent existence. So here His Holiness gives a very nice, short, clear description of what it is. It mistakenly assumes that people and things, things exist in and of themselves by their own nature. So let's just think about that again. People and things exist in and of themselves. So in and of themselves, what does that mean? Not depending upon anything else. They have their own power, some essence, but they just are that from their own side. And then by their own nature, again. So I have to think about again and again what those mean and how that appears in our own experience. And then, so things appear as existing from their own side, independent of other things, just more synonyms. And then, yeah, just a bit more about how appearances can be false. So I already gave the example of like a mirage. Also like reflections in a mirror. When we see a reflection in a mirror, it kind of looks like, you know, when we look at our face in the mirror, it looks like our face is there in the mirror. But of course we realize, I mean, children might think, as a young child or an animal, when we see a reflection, we might think it really is us. But then we touch it and realize it's not, it's just a reflection. But still the appearance of like, that's me, there's my nose, there's my eyes, that's there. And it's kind of a false appearance. And then mirages are discussed, or dreams, like when we're dreaming and we don't know it's a dream. It appears like it's real, like there's real people, we're really falling, someone's really attacking us, or we're really saying this to that person, this is really happening. And then it's only when we wake up that we realize, oh, it was just a dream, right? So that's another kind of false appearance. So I'm trying to point out, there's many different cases where things appear in a way that they don't actually exist. And then there's a famous example of imputing a snake on a rope. This is just like an example of, say we're walking through like the woods, walking in the woods where there are snakes. We know there's snakes in the woods in this area, rattlesnakes, or like in California, I think there's rattlesnakes. So say we're walking through, the bush or the woods somewhere, we know there's snakes, and it's kind of in the dusk, in the evening, when the sun is setting, the light is getting dim. And then we suddenly see like a curved kind of model pattern thing on the ground. And we think, oh no, it's a snake. And then we look closer and we see it's just a piece of rope laying there on the ground. But that first appearance, at first, the rope appears as if it's a snake to us, right? So because of the shape, and because we're already thinking there might be a snake in this area, and the coloring of it, then at first it appears as snake. Appears there's a snake there, but that appearance is totally false, right? When we analyze to see, we see it's not there. So this is another example for how, when someone accuses us of doing something, or we feel attached or angry or jealous, there's a very concrete, solidly existing I, appears to exist, innately appears to exist from its own side. There's a real I there, that doesn't depend upon anything else, a body or mind, our own perception, our own idea of a self. Just it is a real I, and we accept that, right? So the idea is, when we analyze that to see, does I or any part of me exist in that way, we'll see that we don't. That doesn't exist at all. But at first, the appearance is there, and then we grasp at that as being real. Right? So, and then there's appearance to. So there's false appearance, and so false appearance to sense consciousness, to our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and also to thought consciousness. Maybe I won't say more about that now because it's a little bit more than I want to get into. But I guess what I just will say, like, because we've had this kind of ignorance grasping at inherent existence from life to life since beginningless time. Don't ask me why, but we have. Then it puts imprints in our mind, and those imprints affect the way everything appears to us. So even to our sense consciousness, when we see things, they appear to exist from their own side. When we hear sounds, they appear to, like we hear people saying words, and those sounds appear to our ear consciousness. It appears that they exist from their own side. That is that word from its own side. That is the sound of water, just the sound of water from its own side. Another way is like we conceptually box things up as discrete, independent things. That's kind of what this ignorance does. And then when we think of things, if I think of the Eiffel Tower, it appears to, even to that thought consciousness thinking of the Eiffel Tower appears to be one concrete thing existing from its own side. So both our sense consciousness and also our thought consciousness, everything that appears to us appears as something existing from its own side, not as a dependent arising. And that's even the case with emptiness. Even when we think of emptiness, it appears to be something real, concrete, from its own side, not a dependent arising. Whereas everything that exists is a dependent arising, interdependently arising. But we'll come back to that. So then again, we take this false appearance to be true, to be how things actually exist, and then we grasp at things to exist truly or in a fundamental way by their own essence or own power, and things appear to have a more concrete reality, or a more independent reality than they actually do. And we take this to be the fact. And then I think I probably said all this already. Oh yeah. So trying to identify this reification in our own experience. So that's what we want to do last. So yeah, I've said all this already, I think. Looking at how we exist as a person, as something imputed on the body and mind. I spoke about that. And then looking at how we appear as something not imputed on our body and mind. So we contrast these two, right? We can see how we're imputed on different parts, but then when we look how we, appear normally, when we're not doing that, then we appear as not imputed on our body and mind. But as not imputed on our body and mind, but as existing more concretely than this, having our own essence, existing inherently from our own side, independent, or independent of being imputed upon our body and mind, right? As something more than just that. So then we look at our perception of ourselves when we're highly emoted and in a more neutral state, and then looking at our perception of other people and phenomena. Yeah, and how they appear to sense consciousness, conceptual consciousness. And then, yeah, and it's not all of our perceptions are heavily colored by ignorance. So it's not that always the case that things appear strongly as existing from their own side. There's different degrees of it. Yeah, and then there's different kinds of dependent arising. We'll come back. I won't go into that now. But in short, there's dependence upon causes and conditions, dependence upon parts, and then dependence upon naming and mental imputation. And we need to analyze again and again. So yeah, we'll come back and go over that stuff more later, next session. So now, yeah, the main thing just I hope you take away from this session today is the difference between things being dependently arising phenomena, existing independence upon many different parts and dynamic processes and causes and conditions, versus things existing in isolation from their own, on their own, and how we as a person, especially in certain situations, appear to exist as something from our own side, in isolation, or on our own. Okay, but now any questions or comments related to anything we did today?
I have a question. How is self-image or self-identity related to this seemingly inherently existing I?
What do you mean by self-image or self-identity?
I guess sometimes if I think of like the defensiveness, there's like a self-image that comes up. But then again, I'm not sure if it's really an I or maybe it's just something like a cloak over the I. Because it seems like the self-image is not always the same, because it's kind of like dependent on the person I'm interacting with. Perhaps it changes depending on like what I'm defensive about, for example. But I guess I'm just curious. Because I guess it's
No,
not
yeah.
really an I, but it seems like it's close enough.
Well, yeah, this brings up a really important issue, that because is there an I or not, right? Yeah, we exist. Like, we are individual, we're each individual person, right? So they're like, in relation to me, I'm I and you are you. For you, in relation to yourself, you are I and I am you, right? So I is it's kind of a referential. Like, when we refer to ourselves, we're an I, and then everybody else is someone else. And each of us has that sense where there's me and other people. So is there a person? Yes. I mean, actually, I, person, and self, they're all synonyms in Buddhist philosophy. So now, but self, there's the self that's synonymous with I or a person. That's different from the self that is refuted, which is the inherently existent self. So when we talk about there's no self, we're talking about, we have to qualify that as there's no inherently existent self. So this is where the terminology becomes really confusing, because you see a lot, there's no self, um, selflessness. That doesn't mean there's no person, there's no I. It means there's no inherently existent self. So when we talk about feeling defensive and that sense of I arises, it's not that there is no person, there is no I. So we do have, um, but it's rather that we exaggerate how real that I is. So the person that does exist actually is a dependently arising phenomenon. We exist in dependence upon our body, upon our mind, and upon our idea of a self, of a person. Right. So, and we do have, like you say, sometimes we appear in one light, sometimes it's a different light. Our sense of who we are and our self-image, a sense of different characteristics and features of ourself, that does change, and that's fine. But the main problem is we reify, or we exaggerate how real that I seems to be, especially in the sense of it seems to exist, or just is a real essence to our I from its own side. That we exaggerate. So yeah, so when we talk about the I that does exist, is the conventional I. Say, there's a conventionally existent person, and our self-image is, yeah, I mean, it should be more related to that. That's okay. I know it's a little difficult. As I'm saying it, sometimes I feel like I'm repeating the same thing again and again and again. But yeah, sometimes more words become more. We have to just kind of go back to the reflection ourselves, and try to get a sense of what we're talking about. Any other questions? If not, then why don't we meditate then for like 10 minutes or so. So get comfortable in your meditation posture. So first, just focus your attention on an object of meditation. So let's practice placement meditation for about a minute, so you can focus on your breath or on your mind. And simply focus your mind on an object of meditation for 1 minute. So then let's begin by looking at a different situation when we have we're highly emoted, have a strong afflictive emotion arising, to get a sense of how the I appears innately through the force of ignorance. So think about a time when either you were jealous. So jealous arises through attachment. So through force of being strongly attached to something, and then seeing someone else get it and us not getting it, we can feel jealous. Or you feel annoyed at something, or you just felt annoyed about something. So either of those. Think about a time in the past when you felt very jealous. So try to kind of relive that situation. Sort of have yourself surrounded by it. Try to be in the midst of it again, and let the kind of emotion, the jealousy, arise. But then with the corner of your mind, look at like, who is it that's feeling jealous? Who is the I that's jealous? But you have to be very subtle with the way you look. And so sometimes you exaggerate more, put more emphasis on feeling jealous, what the thing you were feeling jealous about. Shift back to that, and then shift back to kind of looking at who is it that feels jealous. You kind of have to shift back and forth between the two to keep that sense of grasping at an I arising. Or a situation where you're just annoyed about something, someone. So yeah, try that for a couple minutes. So again, thinking of a time when you're jealous, and then looking at how the I appears to exist in that moment, in that state of mind. Does it seem to exist from its own side as something concrete and real, independent of anything else? And then just very briefly, so if that I is real, does exist in the way it appears, then as if we look for it, if we zoom in to find it more precisely, it should become clearer and clearer. what it is, where it is. So let's just briefly look, does that I that's feeling jealous, does it exist somewhere in the body? So if we search through our whole body, mentally look through all the parts of your body, your head, your shoulders, your back, your chest, your arms, your legs, will you find that I that's jealous anywhere in the body, in your body? And then look at your mind. Is there any part of your mind, any perception or thought or feeling that is that I? So can you find that I that is jealous anywhere in the mind? And then finally, can you find that I anywhere separate from the body and mind? Somewhere else, or existing independently separate from the body and mind on its own, unrelated to those, to the body and mind. And then finally, just imagine that you and everything else dissolves into space. And just let your mind rest in this kind of empty spaciousness. Okay. We'll conclude there. So let's dedicate within the recognition of all phenomena as being dependently arising and empty of inherent existence. Then we dedicate whatever merits we've created by this session. We can rejoice in the merits we ourselves have created and those created by others, and any merits or positive karma created by all the all other sentient beings, or like ourselves, and all enlightened beings. And then we can dedicate, in short, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, especially hunger, thirst, illness, and disease, war, violence, and be free from natural disasters and global warming, climate destruction. May we be able to do whatever we can to quickly alleviate all these different forms of suffering and problems. And then may all sentient beings be free from all the oceans of samsaric suffering and the root cause of those, ignorance, grasping at inherent existence. And to this end, may the Buddha's teachings spread, and all authentic spiritual teachings which lead sentient beings to ultimate happiness spread and flourish, especially all the FPMT centers, and especially Ocean of Compassion Center. May continue to prosper, flourish, and be able to offer Buddhist teachings to countless people. And then may the lives of His Holiness Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and other spiritual teachers be long and stable. And then add any other prayers you'd like to make, bring them to mind. And may all of your prayers also be be fulfilled in accordance with your virtuous aspirations. Okay, now we conclude there. Thank you all. So yeah, during the week, I think I'll send out the outlines I just presented today, and then yeah, if you can do some more of the required reading, and then just reflect on dependent arising, and especially trying to identify the object of negation, as we've been talking about today. That'd be good. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, Venerable Exarch.
Everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, Venerable Lexok and Mary Ellen and Ernst. Have a good week.